If you are building managed applications for the Azure Marketplace, you may be interested in keeping track of your customer purchases. Managed applications offer the ability to configure an optional webhook that will be triggered during deployments when a customer buys your product. Hello, this is David Starr, and in this video we'll walk you through designing this webhook and let you know what to expect from the marketplace behavior. So let's take a look at what we'll go through, and we'll start with an overview of what the webhook is and how it works. Next, you'll see a pretty comprehensive demo of a webhook in action. Let's start with a look at what the webhook in managed applications is all about and how it works. Let's see why it exists for managed applications first. Let's start with what it is. It's an HTTP endpoint called by the Azure Marketplace during application deployment. It can receive post events and process the JSON in the body of the request. Typically, this stores information from the events into a data store of some kind so that you can come back to it later. The webhook is reporting deployment events and status, but since we get information about the managed application being deployed, it provides a way to monitor customer purchases. For example, we'll be able to answer questions like how many purchases have been made and which ones are active, how many customer management applications have been deleted. Use of a webhook is completely optional. With that, let's take a look at a visual depiction of the webhook architecture and process. Here we'll walk through a visual of how managed application webhooks work. It starts with a customer making a purchase of a managed application from the marketplace. The purchase process deploys a managed application into the customer tenant. The managed application and the corresponding managed resource group have a deployment lifecycle. During deployment, the managed application reports back to the marketplace. It provides status updates about the deployment as it's in progress. The marketplace then notifies the webhook of these status events by calling the webhook, and it is represented here as an Azure function but can be implemented in any technology and hosted anywhere you like, not even on Azure. Now, several calls will be made during the course of a deployment. Let's take a look at the status events that get reported. Firstly, there's the accepted state. So you'll get a call to your webhook when a deployment has been accepted. And this means the deployment has begun, but no resources have yet to be deployed. Next, you'll get a succeeded event on your webhook, and this indicates that the deployment was successful. When the customer decides to delete the managed application, it will also delete the managed resource group, but in any case, you'll get a deleting event on your webhook that indicates that deletion has started. Finally, you'll get a deleted event notifying you that the managed application and the managed resource group have been successfully deleted. Any of these operations might fail, and if they do for some reason, you'll get an event that the creation or deletion of the managed application has failed. Using these states, the webhook can store information about each deployment and each purchase of your managed application. We're going to look at what it looks like in Partner Center to configure a webhook for a given plan. First of all, we can note that they are configured per plan, so we can have a different webhook for each plan in our offer should we choose to do so. And it is part of the configuration for technical assets that you'll find associated with each plan. Here we see a very typical example of what a notification endpoint might look like inside Partner Center. There's just a field for it, and you put in the endpoint that you want to call. There's something very important here, and that is the structure you use for setting up your webhook URL in Partner Center. Notice we have your endpoint URI followed by a required /resource. Now you don't put that in to Partner Center, it will be appended to the URL that you do put in. And then you can have optional parameters that you might pass to your webhook. This is something I can't overstate. The marketplace appends that resource string to the base URL. Also, optional parameters can be used to secure endpoints. Now, you don't have to do this, but one way to secure your endpoint is simply to check for a key value pair that you can pass as an optional query string parameter. Like this, you can see that we've got a secret equal to a GUID, and that secret equal to a GUID can be checked for security purposes in the query string of the call that's being made. Now again, I'm going to show how this might look in Partner Center. And again, what's important here, I'm just going to highlight, is that between API and your query string, there is no resource string that the managed application webhook will append. Notice that it gets appended automatically. So let's now look at webhook behaviors. You should return an HTTP 200 OK code to indicate that the webhook has successfully been called and you've done the appropriate work. And if you return one of these errors, this will cause a retry from the Azure Marketplace. And those include not found, too many requests, or a 500 server error or greater. Now, if the marketplace runs into any issues by receiving any of those status codes, it will retry to send to your webhook for up to 10 hours before canceling the calls to the webhook. Now let's jump into a demo, in fact a series of demos, in which we're going to look at a few things, starting with the scenario for which we're designing our webhook. Secondly, we'll look at Partner Center configuration and how that actually looks. Next, we'll look at the customer purchase process to see how to trigger that webhook during deployment. And finally, we'll see the webhook result because we'll be able to inspect the payload that came over the webhook endpoint. Let's start with the scenario. So the scenario is I've actually built a small solution that looks like this. The customer subscribes to the marketplace, as we mentioned earlier. That subscription deployment will send notifications to a publisher webhook. Now, I've indicated here this is an Azure function that I've created. Could be any sort of HTTP endpoint technology, though. Now, my endpoint happens to write to a Cosmos database. So I write the JSON from the payload directly into Cosmos, and we'll be able to inspect it to see what that payload looks like. Here we are in Partner Center, and we're looking at an offer named Managed App Demo Offer 1. Within this, we're going to select Plan Overview, which takes us to all of the plans that have been defined for this offer. We'll look just at Publish Managed. And in this plan, we'll go to Technical Configuration, scroll down just a little bit to Notification Endpoint URL. Remember I said that the substring resource will be added automatically to the notification endpoint URL. So your endpoint actually needs to be named resource. And from here, we can put it just at our base URL /API because that's where my resource endpoint is going to reside. Next, let's head over and act as the customer in purchasing this application. So we'll create and choose a resource group into which we want to deploy our managed application instance, and then we'll give it a name. And in this case, we'll call it DSMA01, and we give a name to our managed resource group that we're going to create. And so I'll use the same prefix followed by MRG. Next, this application is going to deploy nothing more than a storage account. So we're going to use the same prefix for that storage account. And finally, we'll hit review and create and scroll down to agreeing to the terms and conditions of co-admin access permission. This is publisher managed, recall. And finally hit the create button. This will take a moment for both the managed application and the MRG to be deployed into the customer tenant. So I'm going to speed that up a moment so that you don't have to watch the complete deployment. Great, my deployment is complete, and I can go to the resource, which is the managed application instance itself, and see certain information about it. But we're interested in the payload that got sent to the webhook that I defined. So I defined a webhook that writes the payloads from the HTTP request directly into Cosmos DB. Let's see what that looks like. Here are two messages that we received. The first one says accepted. Now, if you'll recall from our states, this means that the deployment itself was accepted by the Azure Marketplace. The second message we received is succeeded, which means that our deployment did in fact succeed. There's interesting data in this payload, and one is the name of the plan that was purchased, the product that was purchased, this is the offer ID, the publisher, which should be yourself, of course. And then we have the application ID, which actually contains the ID of the subscription that was made to the managed application. We can store this in our database as a way to look up purchases later. Those fields will be present on all the payloads that you receive from the marketplace, regardless of the provisioning state. Great, so let's take a quick look at what we just went over, and we started with an overview of the webhook for managed applications, how it works, and a few bits of information about using it. Next, we actually exercised that webhook by implementing a scenario that started in Partner Center, and then we purchased the application as a customer and finally inspected the webhook events that were sent during the purchase process. Thank you for joining us for another video from Mastering the Marketplace, the learning library where technologists go to get their offer on the Microsoft Marketplace. For more videos, hands-on labs, and sample code, find us at aka.ms/masteringthemarketplace.